At 72, I thought I'd weathered every storm life could hurl at an old woman. The sudden widowhood that hits like a sledgehammer to the chest. The empty nest syndrome that echoes through hallways once filled with laughter. The slow, creeping realization that your body isn't the reliable machine it used to be. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the day I stumbled into a secret so vile, so calculating, that it nearly shattered what was left of my faith in family. If you're new to Voices of Rosa, I'm Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie, and I'm about to share a story that'll make you question every whispered conversation happening behind your back. Before you judge me for what I did next, before you shake your head at an old woman's revenge, hear me out. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the very ones sharpening the knives. This isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a battle cry for anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or written off as yesterday's news. My world, before it imploded, was pleasantly predictable. I live in a 2-story colonial in suburban Ohio that's been my anchor for 43 years. The kind of house where the wooden floors creak like old bones when you walk the hallways at night, where the kitchen table bears the scars of countless family dinners, knife marks from Harold's enthusiastic carving, water rings from sweating glasses during summer barbecues, even a small burn mark from the time 8-year-old Lisa tried to help with Thanksgiving dinner. Every imperfection tells a story, and I've been the keeper of those stories for 4 decades. The sunroom is my sanctuary, bursting with African violets in every shade of purple imaginable. Harold used to joke that I talked to them more than I talked to him, and he wasn't entirely wrong. Plants don't betray you. They don't whisper behind your back or plot your downfall over morning coffee. They simply need water, sunlight, and a gentle touch, luxuries I'd always assumed my family needed from me too. Harold passed 10 years ago from a heart attack that struck him down like summer lightning, swift, brutal, and utterly without warning. One moment he was laughing at something ridiculous on the evening news, the next he was gone, leaving me to navigate widowhood with the grace of a newborn deer on ice. But I've managed, perhaps better than anyone expected. I have my routines: Tuesday knitting circles at the senior center where we solve the world's problems one stitch at a time, Thursday volunteering at the animal shelter where the dogs don't care that my hands shake slightly when I pour their kibble, and most importantly, weekends with Tyler. Tyler is my grandson, my daughter Lisa's boy, and at 16, he's become my lifeline to a world that often feels like it's spinning too fast for my taste. All gangly limbs and that mop of chestnut hair that defies every brush known to mankind, he's got his grandfather's mischievous grin and a heart that seems too big for his lanky frame. Ever since Lisa and her husband Greg started splitting their time between here and their high-powered jobs in Columbus, something lucrative in finance for him, marketing for her, Tyler has been my constant weekend companion. He crashes on my guest bed, devours my pancakes like they're the last food on earth, and regales me with tales from high school that make me grateful I survived my own teenage years long before social media existed. "Nana Maggie," he'd say, syrup dripping from his chin, "you're the only one who gets my dumb jokes." We'd spend Saturday afternoons binge-watching old westerns, him quoting John Wayne lines that I'd pretend to forget just to hear his laugh echo through rooms that had grown too quiet. But looking back now, I should have noticed the subtle signs. The way Greg's eyes lingered too long on my jewelry when he thought no one was watching. How Lisa's phone calls had grown shorter, more perfunctory. The whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The way Tyler sometimes looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, protective, worried, like he was carrying a burden too heavy for his teenage shoulders. It was a muggy Friday evening in late August when my perfectly ordered world began its spectacular collapse. The kind of evening where the air hangs thick as honey, where even the slightest movement makes you feel like you're swimming through humidity. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of leftover chili, Wednesday's batch, spiced exactly how Tyler liked it with just enough kick to make his eyes water but not enough to send him running for milk. Tyler had rolled in around 6:30, exactly as he had every Friday for the past 3 months. His ritual was endearingly predictable: soccer practice, followed by the ceremonial dumping of his overstuffed backpack by the front door like some sort of teenage offering to the household gods. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, his practice jersey clinging to his lanky frame, and he had that particular ode to teenage athlete fragrance that no amount of body spray could mask. "Nana, please tell me you've got some of that chili left," he called out, already making a beeline for the kitchen island where he knew I'd have a bowl waiting. Coach Henderson made us run suicides until Davidson puked. I'm pretty sure I left half my soul on that field. I chuckled, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. Lucky for you, I made extra. Growing boys and their hollow legs, I learned that lesson when your mother was your age. I ladled a generous portion into his favorite bowl, the one with the small chip on the rim that he claimed gave the food character. Tyler settled onto his usual stool, phone in one hand, spoon in the other, the modern teenager's version of multitasking. But as he reached across the counter to plug his charger into the wall outlet near the window, I heard a sharp crack followed by a shower of sparks that made us both jump back. "Whoa, that's definitely toast," Tyler muttered, holding up the frayed cord where the wire had finally given up its battle against daily wear and tear. The plastic casing had split, revealing copper innards that looked about as healthy as a severed artery. His phone screen flickered once, twice, then went black with the finality of a closing curtain. "Dead as a doornail," he sighed, tapping the screen with the desperate hope that somehow willpower alone could resurrect the device. For a teenager, losing phone access is roughly equivalent to losing a limb, traumatic, disorienting, and requiring immediate medical attention. "No worries, kiddo," I said, already moving toward the junk drawer that served as our household's unofficial electronic graveyard. "I've got a spare somewhere in this chaos." I rummaged through the collection of mismatched cables, dead batteries, and mysterious adapters that accumulate in every home like technological tumbleweeds. Here we go, from that old landline setup I could never figure out how to use properly. I fished out a dusty USB cable, the universal kind that promises to work with anything manufactured after the turn of the century. "Here, swap with mine for now. I'll charge yours overnight on my desktop in the den, and we'll sort out a replacement tomorrow." Tyler shrugged with the casual indifference that only teenagers can truly master. "Thanks, Nana. You're a lifesaver." He handed over his phone without a second thought, already focused on more pressing matters, like whether I had any of those chocolate chip cookies hidden in the pantry. I carried his phone to the den, that small, cluttered room that served as my home office, library, and general dumping ground for anything that didn't have a designated place elsewhere. My ancient desktop computer hummed to life with the enthusiasm of a machine that remembered when dial-up internet was cutting-edge technology. As I plugged Tyler's phone into the charging port, the screen illuminated with that familiar Apple logo, followed by the lock screen that showed his wallpaper, a photo of the two of us from last summer's county fair, both grinning like idiots over our shared funnel cake. Curiosity, they say, killed the cat. But what they don't mention is how irresistibly it calls to grandmothers who spend too much time alone with their thoughts. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was simply checking to make sure the charging was working properly, making sure the connection was secure. At least, that's what I told myself as notifications began popping up on the screen like digital fireflies in the gathering dusk. Text message notifications. Multiple ones. From Lisa. The preview lines were just visible enough to make my blood run cold. "We need to talk about Nana. And Greg's got the papers ready." And the one that made my hands start trembling, "Time to get serious about getting rid of her." Getting rid of her. Getting rid of me. I stared at the screen, certain I'd misread something, certain that my aging eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light of the den. But there it was, stark and undeniable as a cancer diagnosis. My own daughter, discussing my disposal like I was an unwanted piece of furniture cluttering up their carefully planned lives. My heart began hammering against my ribs with the fury of a caged bird, and I sank into the desk chair before my knees could give out entirely. The room seemed to tilt sideways, as if the very foundation of my world had shifted beneath my feet. Because in that moment, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in their lives, about the love I'd assumed was unconditional, all of it was built on quicksand. With shaking fingers that felt disconnected from my body, I tapped the screen. Tyler's password had always been his birthday, bless that predictable boy, and within seconds, I was staring at a conversation that would haunt my dreams for weeks to come. The thread was from the previous night, a cold, calculated exchange between my daughter and my grandson that read like a corporate board meeting discussing the fate of an underperforming asset. Only the asset was me. The woman who had rocked Lisa through colicky nights and cheered at every ballet recital. The grandmother who had taught Tyler to drive in empty parking lots and never once complained about the gray hairs he'd given me. Lisa's message, sent at 10:47 p.m., we need to talk about Nana. Greg's got the papers ready. It's time to get serious about getting rid of her. Tyler's response, sent just 2 minutes later, Mom, no. You can't do that to her. She's family. My chest tightened as I read Tyler's words. Even in text form, I could hear the pain in his voice, the desperation of a boy caught between his loyalty to me and his love for his mother. But Lisa's response was swift and merciless. Family? She's a burden, Ty. That house is worth a fortune now with the market up. The nursing home's the kindest option. We'll visit. A burden. The word hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. After 43 years in this house, after raising a daughter here, after building a life with Harold that was meant to last forever, I was a burden. An inconvenience to be managed, shuffled off to some sterile facility so they could cash in on my life's work. Tyler's next message made tears blur my vision. Kindest? You're talking about locking her away so you can cash in. Dad agrees with this? Your father's on board. It's for the best. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I scrolled up, desperate to understand how long this betrayal had been brewing, how many family dinners had been seasoned with lies, how many hugs had been tainted with ulterior motives. The conversation stretched back weeks, maybe months. There were references to assessments and evaluations. Mentions of power of attorney that made my stomach churn with the realization of how thoroughly they'd planned my downfall. And then I found it, the link that made everything horrifyingly real. Maple Grove Assisted Living, 2 hours away in a town I'd never heard of. The website photos showed exactly what you'd expect: sterile rooms with hospital-grade furniture, smiling aides who looked young enough to be my great-grandchildren, and marketing copy that promised dignified care for your loved ones while charging prices that would drain my savings faster than a broken dam. But it was the financial details buried deeper in their conversation that truly made me sick. Greg had been busy, spreadsheets calculating the house's current market value, projections showing a potential sale price of $450,000 easy, minus what they euphemistically called relocation costs. They'd even consulted a lawyer, some sleazy character named Harlan who specialized in what the legal world calls conservatorship, though what it really meant was stripping away every right I'd spent 72 years earning. Easier if she's deemed incompetent, one of Greg's forwarded emails read. Incompetent. I'd been balancing checkbooks since before these two were potty trained, had run a household, raised a child, survived widowhood, and maintained my independence through sheer force of will. But to them, I was incompetent. The cruelest cut came in a message from Lisa sent just 3 days earlier. The memory thing last week clinched it. When she couldn't find her keys? Perfect documentation of declining cognition. I remembered that day. I'd turned the house upside down looking for my car keys, only to find them in the refrigerator where I'd absent-mindedly left them next to the milk. It was the kind of silly mistake anyone could make, the kind of thing that happens when you're distracted or tired or simply human. But they'd catalogued it like evidence in a criminal case, building their argument for why I couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. But Tyler, my sweet, loyal Tyler, had been fighting for me all along. His messages painted a picture of a young man caught in an impossible situation, trying to protect his grandmother while navigating the minefield of family politics. Late-night texts to his friend Alex revealed the depth of his distress. Mom and Dad are pushing to put Nana in a home. Say it's for her good, but it's all about the money. The house is all she's got left. What do I do? Alex's response was simple and heartbreaking. Tell her, man. Tyler's reply, can't. She'd be heartbroken. I'm trying to stall them, but I don't know how much longer I can hold them off. Fresh tears came then, but these were different, laced with fury and something that felt dangerously close to pride. My grandson, this whip-smart boy with dreams of engineering school and a future brighter than anything I could have imagined, was sacrificing his own peace of mind to protect me. Against his own parents. In the face of pressure that would break most adults, let alone a 16-year-old kid trying to navigate his junior year of high school. I scrolled through weeks of messages, watching Tyler deflect and delay, watching him make excuses for why I couldn't take their calls, why the assessments had to be postponed, why the lawyer meetings needed to be rescheduled. He'd been my unknowing guardian angel, buying me time I didn't even know I needed. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. Buried in Lisa's photo gallery was a series of screenshots, real estate listings for comparable houses in the neighborhood, Zillow estimates that made my property look like a winning lottery ticket, and most horrifying of all, floor plans for condos in Florida where Lisa and Greg plan to retire once this is all settled. They weren't just planning to rob me of my independence. They were planning to use my life's work to fund their early retirement, to finance a lifestyle built on the grave of everything Harold and I had worked to build. The house where I'd brought Lisa home from the hospital, where Tyler had taken his first steps, where Harold had died in his favorite chair, all of it was just money to them. Just numbers on a spreadsheet to be optimized and liquidated. I sat in that chair until the room grew dark around me, reading and rereading their messages, trying to find some evidence that I'd misunderstood, that there was some benign explanation for what looked like a carefully orchestrated campaign to steal my life. But there wasn't. There was only betrayal, cold and calculated and thorough. The sound of Tyler's laughter drifted in from the kitchen, where he was probably raiding my cookie jar and working his way through a second bowl of chili. He had no idea that I'd discovered his secret war, that I now knew the full scope of what he'd been protecting me from. My brave, foolish boy, trying to shield an old woman from the wolves at her own door. As I finally stood up from the desk chair, my legs unsteady and my mind reeling, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity: they had underestimated me. All of them. They saw an aging widow, a confused old woman who misplaced her keys and needed help managing her affairs. What they'd failed to recognize was that I was Harold's wife, Lisa's mother, and Tyler's grandmother, and I hadn't survived 7 decades on this earth by rolling over and playing dead when things got tough. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But first, I needed to figure out exactly what weapons I had at my disposal. That night, sleep evaded me like a cat avoiding a thunderstorm. I lay in bed listening to the ceiling fan whir overhead, its rhythmic whoosh 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 sounding less like white noise and more like accusatory whispers. You should have known, you should have seen, you should have protected yourself. The digital clock on Harold's old nightstand glowed an angry red, marking the hours with ruthless precision: midnight, 1 a.m., 2:30, 3:15, each minute stretching like taffy in the oppressive August heat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those text messages burned into my retinas like afterimages of lightning. Lisa's clinical coldness. Greg's calculated greed. And Tyler, sweet, loyal Tyler, fighting a war I never knew was being waged. The boy was carrying a burden that would crush most adults, playing diplomat between his conscience and his parents' manipulation, all while trying to shield me from the truth that would shatter what was left of my faith in family. By the time dawn crept through my bedroom curtains, painting the walls in shades of pale gold and regret, I'd made my decision. Knowledge was power, and right now, I was operating from a position of ignorance that could prove fatal to everything I held dear. I needed to dig deeper, to understand the full scope of their betrayal, to document every lie and catalog every deception until I had enough ammunition to fight back. The morning routine felt surreal, like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life. I made coffee with hands that trembled slightly, scrambled eggs that Tyler would never get to eat because he was heading back to Columbus. When he shuffled into the kitchen at 8:30, hair sticking up in 17 different directions and wearing the same clothes from yesterday, my heart nearly broke at the sight of him. Morning, Nana, he said, his voice still thick with sleep and something else, worry, maybe. Or guilt. Thanks for charging my phone. You're the best. I forced a smile that felt like wearing a mask made of porcelain. Of course, sweetheart. Drive carefully on your way home. The highways are crazy on Sunday mornings. I wanted to hug him, to tell him I knew about his secret war, to thank him for trying to protect me. Instead, I handed him a travel mug of coffee and a bag of homemade cookies, the same ritual we'd performed dozens of times before. But as he gathered his things and prepared to leave, Tyler hesitated in the doorway, turning back with an expression I'd never seen before, haunted, conflicted, like a man twice his age carrying the weight of impossible choices. Nana, he started, then stopped, running a hand through his unruly hair. If anyone ever tries to tell you that you can't take care of yourself, or that you need help making decisions, you'd fight them, right? You wouldn't just give up? The question hit me like a freight train. Here was my grandson, trying to warn me without breaking his own mother's confidence, trying to prepare me for a battle he couldn't fight for me. I reached out and touched his cheek, feeling the slight stubble that reminded me he wasn't my little boy anymore. Tyler, I said quietly, I've been fighting my whole life. I'm not about to stop now. Something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe, or hope. He nodded once, kissed my forehead, and was gone, leaving me alone with the silence and the terrible knowledge that my real work was just beginning. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I was back in the den with his phone, diving deeper into the digital evidence of my family's betrayal. What I found made the previous night's discoveries look like gentle warnings compared to the full-scale assault they'd been planning. Greg's email account was a treasure trove of calculated malice. Spreadsheets projecting not just the house's sale value, but detailed breakdowns of my assets, bank accounts I'd thought were private, investment portfolios Harold had set up years ago, even the estimated value of my jewelry and antiques. They'd been researching me like a business acquisition, cataloging every cent I owned with the thoroughness of auditors preparing for a hostile takeover. But the lawyer correspondence was what truly made my blood boil. Harlan Kessler, Esquire, specialized in what his website euphemistically called elder care transitions, though his email exchanges with Greg revealed the ugly truth behind the sanitized language. Cognitive decline documentation, competency challenges, expedited conservatorship proceedings, they had a roadmap for stealing my life, complete with legal precedents and fee schedules. One email chain made me physically nauseous. Greg had forwarded Harlan a list of my recent incidents, the misplaced keys, a grocery list I'd forgotten on the kitchen counter, even the time I'd called Tyler Tommy when I was distracted. Normal human behavior, the kind of minor mistakes everyone makes regardless of age, but they'd weaponized them into evidence of mental decline. The key is establishing a pattern, Harlan had written. Document everything. Small mistakes compound into compelling evidence of diminished capacity. The courts prefer gradual decline narratives over sudden incompetence claims. They weren't just planning to rob me, they were planning to gaslight me into believing I deserved it. But Tyler's messages told a different story, one that filled me with a pride so fierce it nearly overwhelmed my rage. His texts to Alex revealed a young man who saw through his parents' manipulations with startling clarity. They keep saying it's for Nana's own good, but I've seen the real estate site's dad bookmarks. I've heard them talking about retirement condos. This isn't about helping her, it's about cashing her in. More damning still were his efforts to sabotage their timeline. He'd been forgetting to schedule the assessments they'd requested. Losing the contact information for evaluators. Even hiding important mail that came addressed to me, buying time he hoped would somehow derail their plans. One message to Alex from just the week before broke my heart. I can't sleep knowing what they're planning. Nana raised Mom, helped pay for college, babysat me every weekend since Dad started traveling more. Now they want to warehouse her so they can retire early. How is that family? Alex's response was simple but profound. Tell her, Tyler. She deserves to know. Tyler's reply, I can't destroy her faith in Mom. But I won't let them destroy her either. There has to be another way. My brave, principled grandson, trying to save me while preserving what was left of our family. It was noble and heartbreaking and completely unnecessary, because I was far from the helpless old woman they thought they were manipulating. By Monday morning, I knew exactly who to call. Ruth Brennan had been Harold's paralegal back when he'd handled workers' compensation cases for the local steel mill, before his heart attack forced an early retirement that turned out to be tragically brief. But Ruth was more than just a former colleague. She was a force of nature disguised as a sweet grandmother, the kind of woman who baked legendary lemon bars and could dissect legal documents with surgical precision. Ruth, I said when she answered on the second ring, I need your help. Can you come over for coffee this afternoon? I've got a situation that requires your particular expertise. There was a pause, then Ruth's voice sharpened with interest. Maggie, honey, are you in trouble? Because if someone's trying to take advantage of you, they're about to learn why Harold always said I had a spine made of titanium steel. 3 hours later, Ruth sat at my kitchen table, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, and a legal pad covered in precise handwriting. I'd shown her everything, Tyler's phone, the email chains, the lawyer correspondence, even the screenshots of their retirement condo research. She'd listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more thunderous with each revelation. Those scheming bastards, she said finally, her language colorful enough to make a sailor blush. 40 years in family law, and I've seen this exact playbook 100 times. Elder financial abuse with a side of emotional manipulation, textbook predatory behavior. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a container of lemon bars that could have won ribbons at the county fair. First rule of warfare, Maggie, secure your assets before they know you're fighting back. You need a lawyer, and I know exactly who to call. Ruth's nephew Victor was nothing like the sharp-suited television attorneys who populate legal dramas. His office occupied the second floor of a Victorian house converted to professional suites, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that looked like they might collapse under the weight of legal volumes, case files stacked in precarious towers, and a desk that had seen better decades. But his handshake was firm, his eyes were sharp as surgical instruments, and when Ruth explained the situation, his jaw tightened with professional outrage. This is textbook undue influence, Victor said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the evidence on Tyler's phone. They're banking on emotional leverage combined with systematic documentation of alleged incompetence. Classic conservatorship fraud, though they're being unusually thorough about it. He leaned back in his chair, which creaked like an old ship in a storm. The good news is, you're mentally competent, financially stable, and living independently. The bad news is, once they file for conservatorship, you're fighting an uphill battle against a system designed to protect vulnerable seniors, even when those seniors aren't actually vulnerable. So what do we do? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. We get proactive, Victor grinned, and for a moment I could see the family resemblance to Ruth, the same predatory gleam that appeared when they smelled injustice. First, we revise your will immediately. If they're planning to inherit your assets, we make sure those plans involve some very unpleasant surprises. The will revision took 3 hours and felt like therapeutic revenge served at room temperature. Tyler would inherit the house outright, along with a trust fund for his education that would see him through MIT and beyond. Lisa's inheritance, what little remained after Tyler's provisions, would be contingent on a good faith clause that Victor crafted with the precision of a medieval torture device. If she contests Tyler's inheritance, or if she attempts to have you declared incompetent, or if she pursues any legal action that could be construed as elder abuse, Victor explained, her inheritance drops to exactly $1 and a letter explaining why. But the real masterpiece was the addition of what Victor called the documentation clause. Any family member who attempted to use conservatorship proceedings to gain control of my assets would trigger an automatic investigation by the State Elder Abuse Task Force, funded by a portion of my estate specifically set aside for that purpose. Make them sweat, Victor said, signing his name with a flourish. Let them discover that their victim has teeth. We didn't stop with the will. Ruth and Victor helped me document everything: bank statements, medical records, even a video recording of me performing basic cognitive tests that would make their declining mental capacity narrative look like the fraud it was. We photographed every room in the house, cataloged every valuable item, and created a paper trail that would make any attempt at asset manipulation look like what it was: theft. The key to beating conservatorship fraud, Ruth explained as we organized documents into meticulously labeled folders, is making yourself a harder target than they're prepared to handle. They're counting on you being isolated, confused, and compliant. We're going to make sure you're none of those things. But Victor's most brilliant suggestion came at the end of our marathon session. We need to control the narrative, he said, pulling out a device that looked like something from a spy movie. If they're going to have conversations about your future, you should probably hear them firsthand. The digital recorder was smaller than a deck of cards and virtually undetectable when properly concealed. Victor showed me how to activate it with a simple button press, how to hide it in my purse or pocket, and most importantly, how to make sure it captured clear audio that would be admissible in court proceedings. Ohio is a one-party consent state, he explained, which means as long as you're part of the conversation, recording it is perfectly legal. And if they're discussing your disposal like your yesterday's newspaper, I'd say you're definitely part of that conversation. The plan that emerged was elegantly simple and devastatingly effective. I would call Lisa, voice quavering with just the right amount of elderly frailty, and express concerns about my ability to manage my affairs. Not enough to seem suspicious, but enough to trigger their greed. Then I'd suggest, reluctantly, fearfully, that maybe it was time to look at options for additional care. They'll pounce on that like vultures on roadkill, Ruth predicted with grim satisfaction. Greg will see dollar signs, Lisa will see guilt absolution, and they'll both trip over themselves to arrange that facility tour they've been planning. The phone call to Lisa that Wednesday afternoon was pure theater. I'd always enjoyed community theater back in my younger days, and it turned out that decades of performing in church Christmas pageants had prepared me for the role of my life, a confused, frightened old woman ready to surrender her independence. "Sweetie," I said, letting just enough tremor creep into my voice, "I've been thinking about what you mentioned last time you visited. About getting some help with decisions. I had trouble remembering where I put my reading glasses yesterday, and it scared me." Lisa's response was so immediate and enthusiastic it was almost comical. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you called. Greg and I were just discussing this. There are some wonderful facilities, not nursing homes, just assisted living communities where you'd have your own space but with support when you need it." "I don't know," I said, playing my part perfectly. "It feels like giving up. But maybe you could show me some options? I trust your judgment." The tour at Maple Grove was scheduled for the following Thursday. Lisa practically bubbled with excitement at the prospect, promising to pick me up personally and assuring me that I'd love the community they'd selected. Greg, she mentioned almost as an afterthought, would be joining us to help with the practical considerations. Of course he would. He wouldn't miss the chance to walk through my future prison cell while calculating square footage and resale values. Tyler called that evening, his voice tight with anxiety I now understood completely. "Nana, Mom mentioned you're looking at assisted living places. Are you sure that's what you want?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said, maintaining my performance even though every fiber of my being wanted to reassure him, "I'm just exploring options. Getting older isn't easy, and I want to make smart decisions while I still can." I could hear him swallow hard on the other end of the line. "If you need help with anything at all, you know you can call me, right? I'm only 2 hours away. I could drive down on weekends, help with whatever you need." "You're such a good boy, Tyler. But you have your own life to live. College applications, senior year activities. I don't want to be a burden." The silence that followed was so heavy I could practically feel his heart break through the phone. "You're not a burden, Nana. You're never a burden." After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at Harold's empty chair and fighting the urge to call Tyler back and explain everything. But Victor and Ruth were right, the element of surprise was crucial. If Tyler knew I was setting a trap, he might inadvertently warn his parents, or worse, try to talk me out of the confrontation entirely. The night before the Maple Grove tour, I lay in bed thinking about trust and betrayal, about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to be. Tyler had chosen to protect me even when it cost him peace of mind and put him at odds with his own parents. Lisa had chosen to see me as an obstacle to her financial goals rather than the mother who'd sacrificed to give her every opportunity. But I'd made my choice too. I was choosing to fight back, to protect not just my independence but Tyler's future, to ensure that the people who'd tried to dispose of me like unwanted furniture learned exactly what happened when they underestimated a woman who'd survived 7 decades of life's curveballs. The recorder lay on my nightstand, small and innocent-looking but loaded with the potential to detonate their carefully laid plans. Tomorrow, they'd get the performance of their lives, a confused, frightened old woman ready to sign away her freedom for the promise of care and support. What they wouldn't know until it was too late was that the frightened old woman was really a warrior in disguise, and she'd been sharpening her weapons while they counted their chickens. Harold used to say that the most dangerous opponent was the one who had nothing left to lose. But he was wrong. The most dangerous opponent was the one who had everything to lose and the intelligence to fight for it. Tomorrow, Lisa and Greg were going to learn that lesson the hard way. Thursday arrived with the crisp bite of early autumn, the kind of morning where the air smells of dying leaves and new possibilities. I dressed carefully for my performance, a cardigan that had seen better decades, sensible shoes with laces I could struggle with, and my oldest handbag, the one that looked like it had survived multiple garage sales. The digital recorder nestled in the interior pocket like a metallic heart, its presence both comforting and terrifying. Lisa arrived promptly at 10, her smile bright enough to power a small city. She dressed for the occasion too, professional but approachable, the kind of outfit that said caring daughter making difficult decisions. Greg emerged from the passenger seat wearing his weekend casual uniform, khakis and a polo shirt that couldn't quite hide the soft middle age had gifted him, along with an expression that reminded me of a real estate agent sizing up a profitable listing. "Mom, you look wonderful," Lisa said, wrapping me in a hug that felt like a performance for an invisible audience. "Are you excited to see Maple Grove? I think you're really going to love it." I let myself lean into her embrace just a little too heavily, as if my bones were more fragile than they actually were. "I hope so, sweetheart. This is all so overwhelming. I never thought I'd be making decisions like this." Greg's smile had the warmth of a fluorescent bulb. "Don't worry, Maggie. We're here to help you through everything. This is just the first step toward making sure you're safe and comfortable." Safe and comfortable. Code words for profitable and convenient. The drive to Maple Grove took 45 minutes through countryside that should have been beautiful, rolling hills painted in autumn's palette, farmhouses that looked like Norman Rockwell illustrations, meadows where cattle grazed in pastoral contentment. But the conversation in the car turned the scenery into a backdrop for horror. Greg drove while Lisa chattered about amenities and community activities with the enthusiasm of a cruise ship director, and I sat in the back seat feeling like a condemned prisoner being driven to execution. "The dining room has a 5-star chef," Lisa was saying, consulting a brochure that looked professionally printed and entirely soulless. "And they have movie nights, craft classes, even field trips to local attractions." Field trips. Like I was a kindergartner who needed supervised outings to the gift shop. "It sounds lovely," I murmured, letting my voice carry just the right note of resigned acceptance. "Though I'll miss my garden. My African violets have been with me for so long." "Oh, Mom, they have a greenhouse." Lisa's voice sparkled with artificial enthusiasm. "You can grow all the violets you want." What she didn't say, what hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, was that my current violets would die in my abandoned house while she and Greg converted my sunroom into a staging area for their real estate photos. Maple Grove squatted on a hillside like a beige tumor, all institutional architecture and landscaping that looked maintained by committee. The sign at the entrance promised gracious living for today's active seniors, but the reality was more like gracious warehousing for yesterday's inconveniences. The parking lot was full of sensible sedans and SUVs driven by visitors who looked like they were attending funerals. Carla, the director, met us in a lobby that screamed healthcare facility trying to pretend it's a resort. Everything was beige, the walls, the furniture, the artificial flowers that would never need water or care or love. Carla herself was aggressively cheerful, the kind of woman who probably practiced her smile in the mirror each morning and had never met an uncomfortable silence she couldn't fill with meaningless chatter. "Mrs. Roberts. Welcome to Maple Grove. I'm so excited to show you our community." Her voice had the forced brightness of a game show host announcing consolation prizes. "We're going to start with our common areas, then visit one of our lovely studio apartments." Studio apartment. Not a home, not a sanctuary, not a place where memories lived in every creaking floorboard. A studio apartment, like I was a college freshman starting fresh instead of a woman being stripped of everything that defined her. The tour was a masterclass in institutional depression. Common rooms filled with residents who looked like they'd been sedated into compliance. A dining hall where meals arrived on compartmentalized trays and conversations died in the fluorescent lighting. Activity rooms where bingo was apparently the height of intellectual stimulation and craft hour involved gluing macaroni to construction paper. Our residents just loved the structured activities, Carla chirped as we passed a room where a dozen elderly people sat in a circle, staring blankly at a television showing a cooking show none of them seemed to be watching. It takes all the guesswork out of planning your day. The guesswork. The beautiful, chaotic, unpredictable guesswork of deciding whether to bake cookies or read a book or tend my garden or call an old friend. They wanted to eliminate the guesswork, to reduce my life to a schedule posted on a community bulletin board. The sample room was the final insult, a space barely larger than my walk-in closet, furnished with the kind of institutional furniture that had been designed for durability rather than comfort. A twin bed with a mattress that looked like it belonged in a dormitory. A kitchenette consisting of a mini fridge and a hot plate. A bathroom shared with the resident next door, complete with safety rails that screamed frailty and a shower stall that looked like a medical procedure waiting to happen. But the window was what really broke my heart. Instead of the view from my sunroom, my garden, the old oak tree where Tyler had built a fort, the neighborhood where I'd watched children grow up and families change, this window offered a panoramic vista of the parking lot, where visitors came and went like tides, leaving their elderly cargo behind like shipwreck survivors. "It's cozy," I managed, letting my voice waver just enough to suggest overwhelming emotion. "And the best part," Greg said, moving closer to the window and lowering his voice just enough that he thought I couldn't hear, "is the location. Close enough to visit, far enough away that you don't have to worry about daily management." Daily management. I was daily management now, a burden to be outsourced. But Lisa's response was what the recorder captured most clearly, her voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd just solved a complex puzzle, and with the house on the market by Christmas, we could have everything settled before winter. "Harlan says the timing is perfect, tax advantages if we close before year-end." The recorder in my purse captured every word, every calculated syllable of their plans for my disposal. They weren't even trying to hide their intentions anymore. In their minds, I was already gone, already committed to this beige purgatory, already converted from grandmother to asset liquidation. "The community really becomes like family," Carla was saying, oblivious to the financial calculations happening around her. "Our residents support each other through all of life's transitions." Life's transitions. Such a gentle euphemism for the final warehousing before death. As we walked back toward the lobby, I played my part perfectly, asking hesitant questions about costs, expressing concerns about leaving my home, generally behaving like a woman overwhelmed by difficult decisions. But inside, rage burned with the intensity of a forge. They'd brought me here to see my future prison, to soften me up for the signing that would transfer my life into their hands. What they didn't know is that they just provided me with all the evidence I needed to destroy their plans completely. The ride home was quieter, the excitement of the morning tour giving way to the serious business of closing the deal. Lisa made sympathetic noises about how difficult this transition must be for me, while Greg calculated drive times and visiting schedules like he was planning a corporate merger. I sat in the back seat, playing the role of overwhelmed elderly woman while my mind raced with strategy. "Would you like to come in for some tea?" I asked as we pulled into my driveway, letting just enough uncertainty color my voice. "I feel like I need to process everything we saw today." "Of course, Mom," Lisa said, exchanging a quick glance with Greg that I caught in the rearview mirror. "We have plenty of time to talk through your options." My options. As if there were multiple choices on the table instead of the single path they'd already mapped out for me. The kitchen table had always been the heart of my home, the place where we'd shared countless meals and conversations, where Tyler did his homework while I cooked dinner, where Harold and I had planned our future over morning coffee. Now it was about to become a battlefield. I busied myself with the tea ritual, hands trembling just enough to suggest nervousness rather than rage. Lisa and Greg settled into their chairs with the confidence of people who believed they were minutes away from victory. I could practically see the dollar signs reflected in Greg's eyes as he glanced around the kitchen, probably calculating the value of my appliances and wondering whether they'd convey with the sale. "I have to say, Mom, I think Maple Grove is perfect for you," Lisa began, accepting her teacup with a smile that looked genuine if you didn't know what I knew. "The staff seems so caring, and you'd have everything you need right there." "It did seem nice," I said, settling into my own chair and wrapping my hands around my mug like I needed its warmth. Though I have to admit, the idea of leaving this house terrifies me. So many memories. "I understand," Greg said, his tone suggesting he understood nothing at all. "But think about it practically, Maggie. This house is too big for one person, too much maintenance, too many things that could go wrong. At Maple Grove, you'd have security, medical care on site, meals prepared for you. No more worrying about repairs or yard work or any of the stress that comes with homeownership. No more independence, no more choices, no more life." That's what he meant. "We brought some paperwork," Lisa said, reaching into her purse with practiced casualness. "Nothing urgent, just some forms that would help us help you if you decide to move forward." She spread the documents across the table like she was dealing cards in a game where I didn't know the rules. Power of attorney papers, financial management agreements, property transfer documents, everything they needed to strip away my legal rights and take control of my assets. "It's all standard stuff," Greg assured me, producing a pen with the flourish of a magician revealing his trick. "Just gives us the authority to handle the details while you focus on settling into your new home." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made us all turn. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his face pale as winter moonlight, his eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from stumbling into a nightmare. He must have driven straight from Columbus the moment he realized what was happening, breaking speed limits and possibly his own heart to get here in time. "Tyler." Lisa's voice was bright with false enthusiasm, but I could hear the edge of panic underneath. "What a surprise! We didn't expect you until this weekend." "I decided to come early," Tyler said quietly, his gaze moving from his mother to the papers spread across the table to my face, searching for some sign of what was really happening. "Everything okay here?" "Just perfect," Greg said, his smile predatory. "Your grandmother's had a wonderful day looking at her new home. We're just helping her with some paperwork to make the transition easier." I looked at Tyler, my brave, loyal Tyler, standing in the doorway like a sentinel, and something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. This was the moment. This was when the confused, frightened old woman they thought they were manipulating would disappear forever, replaced by the warrior they should have expected but were too blinded by greed to see coming. "Actually," I said, setting down my teacup with deliberate precision, "before I sign anything, there's something I think we all need to discuss." I reached into my purse and pulled out Tyler's phone, placing it on the table where the screen showed their text conversation in brutal clarity. Then I withdrew the digital recorder, its red light blinking like an electronic heartbeat. Starting with this conversation from last night. I pressed play, and their own voices filled my kitchen, discussing my disposal with the casual callousness of commodity traders. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner, the clock ticking on the wall, the sound of Lisa's carefully constructed world beginning to collapse. The color drained from Lisa's face like water from a broken dam. Greg's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his confident salesman persona crumbling in real time. But Tyler stepped into the kitchen with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, his jaw set with determination that reminded me powerfully of his grandfather. I recorded everything, I continued, my voice steady as bedrock now that the performance was over. Every whispered conversation about real estate values. Every casual discussion about competency evaluations. Every callous calculation about how quickly you could liquidate my life's work. Mom, that's not, Lisa started, but I held up a hand that silenced her as effectively as a slap. Save it. I pulled up more evidence, printed emails, financial documents, screenshots of their retirement condo research. I know about Harlan. I know about the conservatorship plans. I know about Greg's crypto investments that went so spectacularly wrong you needed my house to dig yourselves out of debt. Greg's face went from pale to gray to a sickly green that suggested he was about to be physically ill. Maggie, you don't understand the pressure we've been under. The financial markets have been brutal, and we thought. You thought you could steal from an old woman and call it kindness, Tyler said, his voice cutting through his stepfather's excuses like a blade through paper. I've been watching you plan this for months. I've heard the arguments, seen the websites, watched you turn Nana into a problem that needed solving instead of a person who deserved respect. Lisa turned on her son with desperate fury. Tyler, you don't understand what we're dealing with. The debts, the pressure from Greg's firm, the possibility that we could lose everything. So you decided to take everything from her instead? Tyler's voice cracked with emotion, but his resolve never wavered. Do you hear yourself, Mom? You're talking about stealing from the woman who raised you, who helped pay for your college, who babysat me every weekend so you could build your precious careers. The dam burst then, and 20 years of Lisa's careful composure collapsed into ugly, desperate sobbing. I was scared. We were drowning, and I panicked, and Greg said it was the only way, and I thought if we could just get through this crisis, we could take care of you properly afterward. By warehousing me in that beige nightmare while you retire to Florida? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. By stealing my independence so you could fund your escape from the consequences of your own poor decisions? Greg tried one last desperate gambit. The facility would have been good for you, Maggie. Professional care, social activities, medical support. Professional care that I don't need, social activities that insult my intelligence, and medical support for conditions I don't have, I replied. What I needed was for my family to treat me like a human being instead of a burden to be managed. Tyler moved to stand behind my chair, his hands on my shoulders in a gesture of support that meant more to me than any inheritance ever could. I tried to stop them, he said quietly. I kept stalling, hiding mail, forgetting to schedule appointments. I texted Alex about it, asked my counselor for advice. I couldn't figure out how to warn you without destroying what was left of our family. You did everything right, sweetheart, I said, reaching up to cover one of his hands with mine. You protected me when you thought I couldn't protect myself. But I'm not as helpless as they assumed. Lisa looked up from her tears, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint. What happens now? Are you going to have us arrested? Sue us? Destroy our lives the way we tried to destroy yours? I studied my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the scheming manipulator who'd tried to steal my independence, but the scared little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Broken, desperate, morally compromised, but still my child. That depends entirely on what you do next, I said finally. This conversation ends one of two ways. Either you accept that I'm competent to make my own decisions and you back off completely, or I take this evidence to the police, the State Elder Abuse Task Force, and anyone else who'll listen. Your choice. Greg was already pushing back from the table, his face a mask of defeated rage. This is insane. You're making a mistake, Maggie. We were trying to help. The only mistake I made was trusting people who saw me as a bank account with a heartbeat, I replied. Get out of my house, Greg. And if I ever catch you manipulating my family again, you'll discover that this old woman has more fight left than you bargained for. As the dust settled and Greg retreated to his car like a beaten dog, I was left with Tyler and Lisa in the ruins of what had once been a family. But sometimes destruction is necessary before rebuilding can begin. And looking at my grandson's proud smile and my daughter's tear-streaked remorse, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we still had something worth saving. The Monday morning after my kitchen table confrontation, Victor's office became a war room. I arrived at 8 sharp with my arsenal of evidence, Tyler's phone, the digital recordings, printed emails, and a memory sharp enough to recall every detail of their systematic campaign against my independence. Victor had called in his paralegal, a fierce woman named Sandra who looked like she could intimidate Supreme Court justices into confessing their parking violations. We're filing for a temporary restraining order this morning, Victor announced, his desk now organized into strategic piles of legal documents. Elder abuse, attempted financial exploitation, conspiracy to defraud, we're throwing everything at them and seeing what sticks. The beauty of your evidence is that it's all in their own words. The paperwork moved through the court system with the speed of bureaucratic lightning. By noon, we had an emergency hearing scheduled for Wednesday, and by Tuesday evening, Lisa and Greg had been served with a restraining order that prohibited them from contacting me, accessing my financial accounts, or coming within 500 feet of my property. The look on the process server's face when he returned suggested that Greg had not taken the news well. But the real fireworks began when Victor confronted Harlan Kessler, the lawyer who'd been so eager to help them steal my independence for a hefty fee. I wasn't present for that conversation, but Victor's description afterward made it sound like watching a professional poker player fold a winning hand because he suddenly realized he was sitting at a table full of federal agents. Harlan practically sprinted away from your case when I played him the recordings, Victor reported with undisguised glee. Kept saying he'd been misled about the circumstances and that he never would have proceeded if he'd known the alleged incompetency was fabricated. Amazing how quickly unethical lawyers develop ethics when facing potential disbarment. Harlan's abandonment left Greg and Lisa scrambling for legal representation, but word travels fast in legal circles. Within 48 hours, 3 law firms had declined to take their case, citing conflicts of interest that sounded suspiciously like we don't represent people stupid enough to document their own crimes in writing. Greg's response to the legal pressure was predictably cowardly. By Thursday, he'd loaded his car with whatever belongings he could cram into his sedan and fled to Pittsburgh, where his cousin had promised him a couch and possible job leads. The job hunting, according to Lisa's tearful phone calls to Tyler, was going about as well as his crypto investments had. Turns out that being served with elder abuse charges doesn't enhance one's employability in the financial services industry. The emergency hearing was a masterpiece of legal theater. Judge Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd raised 4 children and buried 2 husbands, listened to our evidence with the expression of someone watching particularly stupid criminals present their own prosecution case. When Victor played the recordings of Greg and Lisa discussing my disposal like a corporate restructuring, I watched her jaw tighten with the righteous fury of someone who'd probably dealt with her own family dynamics. Let me understand this correctly, Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made courtrooms fall silent. The defendants planned to have Mrs. Roberts declared incompetent based on normal human behaviors like misplacing keys, then liquidate her assets to cover their own financial mismanagement? That's correct, Your Honor, Victor replied. And they did so while manipulating her 16-year-old grandson into believing he needed to protect her from their plans. The judge turned to Tyler, who'd been subpoenaed to testify about his knowledge of his parents' scheme. My brave boy sat in the witness box looking simultaneously terrified and determined, wearing his best clothes and the kind of serious expression that made him look older than his 16 years. "Mr. Tyler Roberts," Judge Morrison said gently, "can you tell the court about your efforts to protect your grandmother?" Tyler's voice started quietly but grew stronger as he spoke. "I knew my parents were planning something bad. They kept having whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into rooms. I saw the assisted living websites on Dad's computer. I heard them arguing about money and mentioning Nana's house value. So I started interfering." "How did you interfere?" "I hid mail that came addressed to Nana. I forgot to give her messages about appointments. I even told them she was having good days when they asked about her memory, hoping they'd change their minds." Tyler's voice cracked slightly. "I texted my school counselor because I didn't know what else to do. She told me that what they were planning sounded like elder abuse, but I didn't want to believe my own parents would do something illegal." Judge Morrison's expression softened as she looked at Tyler. "That must have been an enormous burden for someone your age." "It was," Tyler admitted. "But Nana raised my mom, helped pay for college, babysat me every weekend. She deserved better than being thrown away because my parents made bad financial decisions." The counselor's testimony was devastating to any remaining credibility Lisa and Greg might have claimed. Ms. Rodriguez, a soft-spoken woman who'd worked with troubled families for 15 years, presented a clear timeline of Tyler's distress and his desperate attempts to protect me without destroying his relationship with his parents. Tyler was experiencing significant anxiety about his family situation, she testified. He described feeling caught between his loyalty to his grandmother and his parents' increasing pressure. "In my professional opinion, no child should be forced to serve as a protective barrier between vulnerable family members and potential financial exploitation." By the time the hearing concluded, Judge Morrison had issued a permanent restraining order, frozen any attempts to gain conservatorship over me, and ordered a formal investigation into Greg and Lisa's financial activities. The look she gave their hastily appointed public defender suggested that she'd seen enough elder abuse cases to recognize this one as particularly egregious. "Mrs. Roberts," she said as we prepared to leave, "I'm sorry your family put you through this ordeal. But I'm impressed by your grandson's courage and your own resourcefulness in protecting yourself." As we walked out of the courthouse, Tyler slipped his hand into mine, something he hadn't done since he was small, and squeezed gently. "I'm proud of you, Nana," he said quietly. "You fought back when most people would have just given up." "I learned from the best," I replied, squeezing back. "You protected me when you thought I couldn't protect myself. That's real family right there." The legal victory was just the beginning of the earthquake that reshaped our family landscape. Within a week of the hearing, Lisa had filed for legal separation from Greg, citing irreconcilable differences in financial fraud in paperwork that read like a corporate dissolution rather than the end of a 20-year marriage. The deeper I dug into their relationship, the clearer it became that Greg's financial recklessness had been destroying their marriage long before they'd set their sights on my assets. Lisa's tearful confessions to Tyler painted a picture of a woman who'd watched her husband gamble away their retirement savings on cryptocurrency schemes and day trading fantasies, then pressure her into increasingly desperate measures to maintain their lifestyle. "He kept saying it was temporary," Lisa sobbed during one of her supervised visits with Tyler, supervised because I'd insisted on being present for any contact with my grandson. "That the market would turn around, that his investments would pay off, that we just needed to bridge the gap until things improved. I was scared of losing everything we'd worked for." But Tyler, bless his honest heart, wasn't buying the victim narrative. "You could have asked Nana for help," he said quietly. "She would have helped you with the debts. Instead, you tried to steal her house." "It wasn't stealing," Lisa protested weakly. "It was ensuring she had proper care while protecting the family assets." "It was stealing," Tyler replied firmly. "And it was wrong." The community reaction was swift and brutal in the way that only small-town gossip can be. Word of the court proceedings spread through our neighborhood like wildfire, and suddenly everyone had opinions about Lisa and Greg's attempted elder abuse. The same neighbors who'd smiled and waved at family barbecues were now crossing the street to avoid Lisa when she came to visit Tyler, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who'd known Lisa since she was in pigtails, stopped by to bring me a casserole and deliver her verdict. "I always thought that Greg was too slick for his own good," she said, settling into my kitchen like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "But Lisa? I never thought she'd turn on her own mother like that. Your poor Harold must be spinning in his grave." The animal shelter where I volunteered buzzed with supportive outrage. Ruth organized what she called a protective circle of friends who took turns checking on me, bringing groceries, and generally making sure I felt surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I owned. It was touching and slightly overwhelming to discover how many people were willing to fight for me once they knew I needed fighting for. Tyler made his choice with the decisive clarity that reminded me so much of his grandfather. 2 weeks after the court hearing, he loaded his belongings into his beat-up Honda and moved into my guest room permanently. Lisa protested, threatened, and finally begged, but Tyler's response was unchanging: "I'm staying with Nana until I graduate. After what you and Greg tried to do, I don't trust you to make decisions that are actually in my best interest." Greg's professional and social downfall was spectacular in its completeness. His former colleagues at the financial firm, the same people who'd once considered him a rising star, now regarded him as toxic. The elder abuse charges, combined with the revelation of his catastrophic investment losses, made him unemployable in an industry that valued both ethical behavior and competent money management. His cousin in Pittsburgh, initially sympathetic to Greg's sob story about family misunderstandings, quickly grew tired of supporting a houseguest who spent his days sending increasingly desperate job applications and his evenings drowning his sorrows in bargain bourbon. By month's end, Greg was sleeping in his car and washing up in gas station bathrooms, a far cry from the comfortable retirement he'd planned to fund with my stolen assets. "He calls me sometimes," Lisa admitted during one of her visits, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Drunk, usually. Blaming me for everything that went wrong, saying I should have stood up to you, that I chose my mother over my husband. As if choosing between theft and honesty was a difficult decision." The divorce proceedings that followed were merciless in their financial transparency. Court-ordered forensic accountants uncovered the full scope of Greg's financial incompetence, not just the crypto losses and day trading disasters, but years of hidden debt, unpaid taxes, and fraudulent loan applications. Lisa, who'd signed documents without reading them because she trusted her husband, found herself liable for debts she'd never known existed. But perhaps the most telling revelation was how quickly their supposedly solid marriage crumbled once the financial pressure was removed. Without the shared goal of stealing my assets to unite them, Lisa and Greg had nothing left but recriminations and blame. Their arguments, conducted via voicemail and text message since Greg was prohibited from direct contact, revealed a relationship built on mutual deception and shared greed rather than love or genuine partnership. As the dust settled and the legal machinery ground on, I found myself analyzing the deeper currents that had nearly destroyed our family. Lisa's transformation from the strong, independent daughter I'd raised to a woman willing to steal from her own mother wasn't sudden. It had been a gradual erosion of character that I'd been too close to see clearly. The girl who'd once stood up to playground bullies and insisted on paying her own way through college had somehow lost herself in the pursuit of social status and financial security. Somewhere along the way, my daughter had traded her integrity for the appearance of success, measuring her worth by Greg's income and their neighborhood's property values rather than by the principles I'd tried to instill in her. Greg hadn't corrupted Lisa so much as he'd provided a convenient excuse for corruption she'd already embraced. His financial recklessness was the catalyst, but her willingness to see me as an obstacle rather than a person revealed a moral rot that had been growing for years. The woman who'd once volunteered at soup kitchens and fought for social justice had become someone who could rationalize elder abuse as kindness if it served her financial interests. But Tyler's response to the same pressures proved that character isn't hereditary, it's chosen, moment by moment, decision by decision. While his parents saw me as a problem to be solved, Tyler saw me as a person to be protected. While they calculated the value of my assets, he measured the weight of family loyalty. While they planned my disposal, he planned my defense. The timeline that emerged from his counselor's records was both heartbreaking and inspiring. For 3 weeks, Tyler had carried the burden of knowledge that would have crushed most adults. He'd lain awake at night, texting friends and school counselors, researching elder abuse laws, and desperately searching for a way to save me without destroying his family. His browser history, recovered from his laptop, showed searches for how to report elder abuse, legal rights of elderly people, and what to do when parents want to put grandparent in nursing home. The most poignant discovery was a draft email Tyler had written to me but never sent, found in his deleted files during the legal investigation. "Dear Nana," it began, "I don't know how to tell you this, but Mom and Dad are planning something terrible. They want to put you in a home so they can sell your house and use the money for their debts. I've been trying to stop them, but I don't think I can much longer. I'm sorry I haven't been brave enough to warn you. I love you." He protected me not because he was strong enough to bear the burden alone, but because he was wise enough to understand that love sometimes requires sacrifice. While his parents demanded loyalty to their schemes, Tyler chose loyalty to truth. While they asked him to participate in their deception, he chose to resist their corruption. The dysfunction that had nearly destroyed us wasn't just about money or greed, it was about the fundamental question of what family means. Greg and Lisa had seen family as a resource to be exploited when convenient and discarded when inconvenient. Tyler understood that family was a responsibility to be honored, a trust to be protected, and a love to be cherished regardless of cost. In the end, their betrayal had revealed not just their own moral bankruptcy, but the strength of the bonds that truly mattered. Tyler and I had emerged from their attempted theft not just as survivors, but as allies united by shared values and genuine love. We'd learned that blood alone doesn't make family, character does. And in that lesson, painful as it was to learn, we'd found something worth more than all the houses and assets and financial security in the world. We'd found each other, tested by fire and proven true. The first order of business was fortifying my independence with the kind of legal armor that would make any future attacks on my autonomy impossible. Victor worked with surgical precision, transforming my simple will into a fortress of trusts, liens, and protective clauses that would survive any challenge Greg or Lisa might mount from their current positions of disgrace and desperation. "We're creating what I like to call a litigation-proof legacy," Victor explained as we signed document after document in his cluttered office. Multiple layers of protection, each one designed to make any attempt at financial manipulation more expensive than it could possibly be worth. The house itself became Tyler's inheritance, held in an irrevocable trust that would transfer to him upon my death or, if I chose, upon his graduation from college. But more importantly, we established a substantial college fund that would see him through not just MIT, his dream school that had seemed impossibly expensive just months before, but graduate school and whatever professional future he chose to pursue. "I can't believe this is real," Tyler said when Victor walked us through the education trust documents. 6 months ago, I was looking at community college and student loans. Now you're telling me I can study engineering at MIT without worrying about money? "Your grandmother believes in investing in the future," Victor replied with the satisfaction of someone who just handed a deserving young man the keys to his dreams. "And frankly, after what you did to protect her, I'd say you've earned every penny." The sunroom renovation began that October, transforming my sanctuary of African violets into a dual-purpose space that could serve both my gardening passion and Tyler's academic needs. We installed built-in bookshelves along one wall, a large desk position to catch the morning light, and electrical outlets strategically placed for laptops and desk lamps. The violets remained, of course, relocated to hanging planters and corner stands that left the main space open for studying while maintaining the room's living beauty. Tyler threw himself into the renovation with the enthusiasm of someone finally able to build instead of defend. We spent weekends at home improvement stores, debating paint colors and furniture choices, turning what could have been a simple room makeover into a celebration of our shared future. He insisted on doing most of the painting himself, claiming it was therapeutic after months of family stress. Greg's disappearance was as complete as his moral bankruptcy. The last anyone heard, he'd been sleeping in his car somewhere outside Pittsburgh, sending increasingly desperate and incoherent text messages to Lisa that she'd started forwarding to the police as potential harassment. His cousin had changed his locks and his phone number, tired of Greg's drinking and his tendency to blame everyone but himself for the consequences of his choices. Lisa's weekly visits were awkward at first, like family dinners where everyone knows terrible things have been said but no one wants to acknowledge them directly. She'd arrive on Sunday afternoons with a tentative smile and a casserole I didn't need, staying just long enough to check on Tyler and offer stilted conversation about safe topics like weather and school activities. "How are your college applications going?" she'd ask Tyler, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone walking through a minefield. "Good," he'd reply, equally careful. "Nana's been helping me with the essays." The unspoken subtext hung between them like smoke, the college applications you tried to sabotage. The future you nearly destroyed. The trust you broke that might never fully heal. But Tyler, bless him, was determined to rebuild what could be salvaged of our family. He'd include Lisa in conversations about his school projects, ask her opinion on colleges, even invite her to stay for dinner when he sensed she was particularly lonely. He was too young to carry the burden of family mediator, but he was wise enough to understand that healing required effort from everyone involved. "I know what Mom did was wrong," he told me one evening as we cleaned up after one of these stilted visits. "But I also know she's lost everything, her husband, her financial security, her reputation. I don't want to lose her too, even if I can never trust her the way I used to." The house felt different now, charged with purpose and possibility rather than weighted down by secrets and lies. My morning routine of tending the violets expanded to include checking on Tyler's study schedule and making sure he had everything he needed for his increasingly demanding senior year coursework. The kitchen table, once a battlefield, became a homework station where Tyler spread out calculus problems in physics labs while I worked on crossword puzzles and correspondence. Community support materialized in ways that surprised and touched me. Neighbors who'd known our family for decades made a point of stopping by, bringing gifts of fresh vegetables from their gardens and staying long enough to chat about everything except the scandal that had briefly made us the center of local gossip. The implicit message was clear: we supported Maggie, we were proud of Tyler, and we had no patience for anyone who'd take advantage of family trust. The animal shelter increased my volunteer responsibilities, giving me additional purpose and connection to people who valued my contributions rather than my assets. Working with abandoned animals felt metaphorically appropriate. We were all survivors of betrayal who'd found new homes and purpose despite the damage inflicted by those who should have protected us. The real breakthrough came on a gray November afternoon when Lisa arrived for her usual visit but stayed long after Tyler had left for soccer practice. We sat in the sunroom, surrounded by violets and the tools of Tyler's academic success, the silence stretching between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did," Lisa said finally, her voice small and uncertain. "I keep trying to find words that don't sound like excuses, but everything I think of just sounds like I'm trying to justify the unjustifiable." I studied my daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the scheming manipulator who'd tried to steal my independence, but the exhausted woman who'd lost everything in pursuit of a financial security that had always been an illusion. She'd aged years in the months since our confrontation, her face carrying lines of stress and regret that made her look older than her 45 years. "Start with the truth," I said quietly. "Not the version that makes you feel better about your choices, but the actual truth about what you were thinking and why you thought it was acceptable." Lisa's tears came then, not the manipulative sobbing of someone trying to avoid consequences, but the quiet weeping of genuine remorse. "I was terrified," she whispered. "Greg's debts were overwhelming, and I couldn't see any way out that didn't involve losing everything we'd worked for. When he said your house could solve our problems, I didn't want to hear it at first. But you listened anyway." I listened anyway. And the more he talked about it, the easier it became to convince myself that we were helping you. That you'd be happier in a place with people your own age, with medical care available, with activities planned for you. She looked up at me, her eyes red but honest. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself it was necessary. That sometimes families have to make hard decisions for the greater good. The greater good being your financial convenience. Lisa flinched but didn't look away. Yes. My financial convenience. My comfort. My refusal to face the consequences of Greg's stupidity and my own willful blindness to what he was doing with our money. The honesty was brutal but necessary. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt like I was talking to my daughter instead of a stranger wearing her face. What happens now? I asked. Not with the legal stuff, that's settled. But with us. With Tyler. With whatever's left of our family. I don't know, Lisa admitted. I've started therapy, court-ordered at first, but I'm continuing voluntarily. Dr. Martinez is helping me understand how I got from being the woman you raised to someone who could rationalize elder abuse as kindness. It's not pleasant work. The therapy sessions, she explained, had been revelations in themselves. Years of gradual moral compromises, of measuring worth by social status, of conflating financial security with emotional safety. Greg hadn't corrupted her, he'd simply provided convenient rationalization for corruption she'd already embraced. I thought success meant never having to worry about money, she said. I thought security meant having enough assets to protect us from any crisis. I forgot that real security comes from having people who love you for who you are, not what you can provide. Over the following months, Lisa's commitment to change became evident in ways both large and small. She found work at a legal aid clinic, using her marketing skills to help low-income families navigate bureaucratic systems. The pay was a fraction of her previous salary, but she threw herself into the work with an intensity that reminded me of the idealistic young woman who'd once dreamed of changing the world. More importantly, she began volunteering at the same animal shelter where I worked, arriving early and staying late to clean kennels and socialize traumatized pets. Working together without the weight of unresolved betrayal between us felt like rediscovering a relationship I'd thought was lost forever. Tyler noticed the change too, gradually relaxing his guard around his mother as her actions consistently matched her words. He started including her in his college planning again, asking her advice about courses and career paths while maintaining the healthy boundaries he'd learned were necessary for his own emotional safety. I think Mom's really trying to change, he told me one evening as we watched her through the kitchen window, playing with a rescue dog that had been too traumatized to trust humans. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it makes me hope we can be a family again someday. A different kind of family, I corrected gently. One built on honesty instead of assumptions, on respect instead of convenience. But yes, I think we can find our way back to each other. The community that had rallied around us during the crisis continued to provide support during the healing process. Ruth organized informal family counseling sessions over coffee and her legendary lemon bars, helping us navigate the delicate process of rebuilding trust without minimizing the harm that had been done. Neighbors made a point of including Lisa in casual conversations, signaling that redemption was possible for those willing to do the hard work of earning it. By Christmas, our new routines had solidified into something that felt less like recovery from trauma and more like the foundation of a life worth living. Tyler's days began with college prep, SAT review, advanced calculus, physics labs that turned our kitchen into a makeshift laboratory. I'd make breakfast while he worked through problems, offering encouragement and the occasional reality check when his academic ambitions threatened to overwhelm his teenage need for sleep. My own days expanded beyond the comfortable routines of widowhood into something more purposeful and engaged. The animal shelter work became the cornerstone of a volunteer schedule that included literacy tutoring at the community center and serving on the library board. Tyler teased me about becoming a professional do-gooder, but I could see the pride in his eyes when he introduced me to his friends as his grandmother who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. The garden flourished under Tyler's surprisingly competent care. He'd inherited Harold's green thumb along with his sense of justice, turning the neglected flower beds into showpieces that made the neighbors stop to admire our roses and ask for gardening advice. The African violets in the sunroom multiplied into a small greenhouse worth of purple blooms, their abundance a living metaphor for growth that comes from proper care rather than benign neglect. But the moment that crystallized our new reality came on Christmas Eve, when Tyler burst through the front door waving an envelope with the MIT seal like he'd just discovered buried treasure. His face was luminous with joy and disbelief, his voice cracking with emotion as he read the acceptance letter aloud in our living room. "Dear Tyler," he began, then stopped to steady his voice. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's undergraduate program in mechanical engineering." I'd known the letter was coming, his grades and test scores had made acceptance likely, but seeing the dream become reality felt like watching a butterfly emerge from its chrysalis. This was the future we'd fought for, the possibility that had been threatened by his parents' greed and preserved by his own courage. "I can't believe it's real," Tyler said, collapsing onto the couch with the letter clutched against his chest. 6 months ago, I thought college was going to be community college and student loans. Now I'm going to MIT to study engineering, and I don't have to worry about money or whether my parents will try to sabotage me again." "Your grandfather would be so proud," I said, settling beside him on the couch and pulling out the photo album that chronicled Harold's own engineering career. "He always said that education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you." Looks like he was right. That evening, as Tyler called friends to share his news and Lisa arrived with tears of genuine pride in her eyes, I found myself standing in the sunroom among the violets and textbooks, feeling Harold's presence more strongly than I had since his death. This was what he would have wanted, his grandson secure in his dreams, his wife protected in her independence, his daughter learning to choose integrity over convenience. The violets bloomed with unusual abundance that winter, their purple faces turned toward the windows where snow covered the garden like a promise of spring renewal. Tyler had labeled each plant with scientific precision, turning my informal collection into a proper botanical inventory, but their beauty remained unchanged by his academic attention to detail. Looking back at that phone charger incident that had started everything, I could see now that it hadn't been an accident or a catastrophe, it had been an opportunity disguised as a crisis. The opportunity to discover who my family really was beneath the surface politeness and assumed loyalties. The opportunity to protect what mattered most and rebuild what was worth saving. Tyler was going to MIT in the fall, prepared not just academically but emotionally for whatever challenges awaited him. Lisa was learning to measure success by service rather than accumulation, rebuilding her character one honest choice at a time. And I was still Maggie, pancakes and violets and all, but stronger now, wiser, and surrounded by people who loved me for who I was rather than what I owned. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the ugliest packages. In our case, betrayal had led to truth, crisis had led to clarity, and the attempt to destroy our family had ultimately shown us what family really meant. As I told Tyler that Christmas Eve while we watched the snow fall on our garden, love isn't something you inherit, it's something you choose, moment by moment, decision by decision. And we'd chosen well. If you're watching Voices of Rosa and this story resonated with you, remember that family betrayal can happen to anyone, at any age. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never be ashamed to fight for your independence. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. And if you're out there plotting against an elderly family member because you think they're too old or confused to fight back, think again. We've got more strength and wisdom than you bargained for. Share this story if you know someone who needs to hear it. Elder abuse thrives in silence, but it dies in the light of truth. Until next time, this is Maggie from Voices of Rosa, reminding you that age is just a number, but character is everything.